Hi everyone. What I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about is contact tracing and privacy, and the paradox that appears to be from and how those problems have been solved from a technical perspective, but the element of trust still um, remains a huge issue for adoption of contact tracing technologies, and then how that can then be translated into business uh, where we're trying to reestablish trust in AI technology and data science. Um, so I'm going to start by talking about how over the last 10 years, people's trust in technology, particularly around the process of data, has taken a number of major hits. How that has then led to now we're in 2020, we've got a global pandemic. We need technology to help us reopen our economies, and how those impacts are now getting in the way of us adopting those technologies. How we can restore that trust using decentralized AI, and then how that can then translate into business where we can adopt the same principles. So I'm just going to move my second here. So it's hard to talk about mass data collection without thinking about Edward Snowden. He noted that time after time, studies have shown that when people know that they're being observed, they act differently. Of course, this is important in terms of a democratic society, but from a business perspective, it also bears weight as well, in that as people have understood the extent of which some tech companies have used their data, to start to engage with technology differently. So in 2013, obviously, we had the Snowden era, the Snowden revelations, where Ed Snowden revealed to the world the extent of the mass data collection that the NSA was conducting. And we can be pretty certain that the NSA is probably not unique in this practices, that there certainly many tech companies have the capability of doing this as well. And how do we're storing that data indefinitely in order for that to be useful at some stage further down the road? And that's for the very small portion of people that may find themselves in the crosshairs of agency with that type of capability, is pretty scary. But by and large, for most of us, it really doesn't have a huge impact on us, other than we just know we're being watched. However, in 2016, when we had the Cambridge Analytical scandal, with the US presidential campaign and the Brexit campaign, and while they were the two large case studies of that, they certainly weren't the first. And the UK and the US were not the first countries to use Cambridge Analytica. But what this demonstrated to us was it's now no longer individuals that can be targeted by mass data collection, but that our society as a whole can be a target. And it can undermine some of the basic fundamentals of what we're trying to do. So moving forward to 2020, having witnessed the tech community or technology being hit time and time again with these trust issues, we're now at a stage where we actually need technology to help us beat a global pandemic through the use of contact tracing apps. Most countries throughout the world have gone into some type of lockdown. We're all now trying to get out of it and salvage what's left of our economies and start as we enter into a global recession. Contact tracing apps are a key piece of the puzzle in terms of being able to do that, where they allow us to reopen our economies and monitor the spread of COVID-19. But naturally, because of the revelations I just mentioned, there's a lot more distrust around the use of technology. People are saying that that contact tracing apps are just going to be used by large companies or governments to perform even more widespread spying and surveillance on citizens. Recently, just under a month ago, we had in Minnesota, the Public Safety Commissioner announced that with the Black Lives Matters protests happening, that they're beginning to perform contact tracing strategies on people who've been arrested during those protests. The use of the term contact tracing in that context really certainly doesn't do anything to help restore people's faith. We wanted to make sure that contact tracing remained out of the hands of law enforcement. So whether or not the extent of how to do that and what to do with that information, if to use it at all, the optics around it does a lot to hinder the trust in technology and in data science. And you can see how that from the adoption rates of contact tracing apps globally, Iceland currently stands at the most adopted app, which is currently at 40%, I think, last time we checked. Whereas Norway have actually, I seen an article yesterday that they are now rolling back on their contact tracing app due to concerns around privacy. And of course, for these apps to be useful, you need a reasonable degree of adoption. Now, the number that people actually say you need varies drastically depending on what source, but the general consensus is you need about 20% adoption before you can start making an impact on the global pandemic. At 60%, you seem to be doing a reasonable amount of damage to the pandemic, and then at 80%, you're in a ballpark where you may stand a chance of actually squashing the pandemic completely. But when you see that that the largest adoption rate to date that any country has seen is 40%, we're a long way from achieving that. So Edelman have been monitoring the trust in different marketplaces for the last 20 years. In terms of tech, so they released a report at the end of February 2020 before the entire world went into lockdown, and before people were becoming paranoid about contact tracing apps. And at that point, they found that while 61% of people believed that technology was moving too fast for regulations to be able to keep up with it, and 66% believe that it's now impossible to know whether the news that you're seeing is actually real or not, and then understand and identify what you can believe. However, there is a glimmer of hope within that study, where they show that if you provide more transparency and more openness around the technology, if you start to reconstruct trust within that technology, you can gain back a reasonable amount of support. For instance, only 56% of people believe distrusted technology should be regulated, while only 39% of people believe that trusted technology should be regulated. And that element of trust is a huge factor of our adoption rates. More mapping that then towards the contact tracing apps, the Nuremberg Institute of Marketing performed a study on 4 different proposed apps with different features of privacy to test how adoption rates would vary over them, and they found that the willingness to adopt those technologies ranged from 31% up to 70%. The key factors that they found that drive confidence in those technologies is, where does oversight lie? Is it with a large international tech company? Is it with a government? Again, that's going to depend largely on where you live. This is in Germany. I imagine in other countries you might see that having a more of a positive or more negative impact. How the data is handled, so how long the data is stored for. If it's stored for a non-specified amount of time, where then it can be repurposed for a different use, that makes people feel very uncomfortable. But if you specify that the data is only going to be stored for a short period of time, solely for the reason of defeating the pandemic, that's something that people then become a lot more comfortable with. Anonymizing the data tracked and decentralized data storage were also key in achieving this. So out of that, we see that a decentralized contact tracing app gives people the most confidence. What this essentially means is, it means we don't have a mass data collection happening from this technology. People's location and what their activities aren't being tracked. And it's the principle behind the Google and Apple API that was released recently. I think when you see Google and Apple actually collaborating, this was a collaborative project between both companies, and when you see them collaborating together to solve issues in each other's technologies, it gives an indicator of how serious they're taking it. So how this decentralized contact tracing works, and how the Google and Apple API works, is essentially 2 people meet, Alice and Bob. They both are using a contact tracing app on their phones. Their apps exchange unique key codes with each other, and they both store each other's key codes. Now, each person's key code is unique to them. It's randomized, and it's regenerated every 10 to 15 minutes. So that means that you can't re-identify somebody by seeing who they've been in contact with, or seeing how many what other people have witnessed their key codes. So when that happens, then say one of those people, Alice, develops symptoms of COVID-19. They then see a doctor and report the instance to via their app. At that point, all of Alice's key codes are uploaded and stored on a cloud server. Now, these key codes don't actually contain any identifying information about Alice. They're just randomized key codes. then every day, every other user of that app, their phone automatically checks the database in the cloud server to see what codes have been uploaded. And if they spot a code that that has been stored on their own device, that person then gets an automatic alert. That means that most people's information never actually goes up into a cloud server. It remains on their device. Also, no location data is needed to actually achieve this. And because everyone's key codes are being regenerated every 10 to 15 minutes, it then becomes really difficult to be able to identify even who's been in contact with who. So that's essentially how decentralized COVID or contact tracing apps work, and how that's the technology that's been providing more confidence in the approach. So where does this fit with business, and how can we adopt similar technology? So there's a area in machine learning called Federated Learning. It's been in development for a number of years. Both Apple and Google are actually have put significant efforts behind development further. And it's essentially decentralized machine learning. It provides a much greater level of data privacy, and it also has an additional benefit to also providing more personalized AI. So a great example of federated learning is actually the predictive text technology that you have on your phone, where it over time learns how you talk the more you engage with your phone. When you get a new phone, you get frustrated because the predictive text comes up with garbage that isn't how you talk. And then over time, it starts to identify the type of words and language that you use, even being able to predict whole sentences. So how federated learning works is Alex is using her phone, and her phone is collecting data on how she engages with what she does with it. Within the phone is a AI model that is doing some predictions on her usage and behavior from the start, such as when, as you see with your predictive text. As soon as you turn on your phone, your predictive text works. It mightn't work very well, but it does work. Then over time, still contained on her phone, as her phone collects more data, it trains that AI and customizes Alex's experience. Now, instead of doing collecting Alex's data in a cloud server, we simply upload the AI model instead, while Alex's data remains on our phone. Alex's model is then combined with an overall global AI model, allowing the entire system to learn as a full unit. Then as thousands of people use the application and the global AI gets even better, that then gets downloaded back to Alex's phone, and she continues to experience an improving system. But you might spot that there's still a couple of gaps in terms of, okay, Alex's data never leaves her phone, but we are getting a model that an AI model that can identify her and her behavior. So maybe that's the other cause for concern. So there's two more steps that can be used to alleviate that. The first step is encryption, so the AI model can be encrypted before it leaves the phone, and then in the cloud, then when you have thousands of models being uploaded, you can anonymize them and prevent re-identification of each person by basically combining all those models and averaging over them to get an overall average before you then use that resulting model to update your global AI. And this is effectively a technique that is being used probably not as well as we would like, but to provide a greater level of privacy. It certainly alleviates a lot of concerns for companies in terms of if you have any concerns around data regulations and compliances. In this sense, you're not really handling much of people's data. So from a potential problem of leaks or even 0 days scenarios, it provides you with a lot more security, but it also provides your users with a lot more comfort. Many people argue that this type of technology is the main core element of Apple's current business model, where they're the premium option in every market that they're selling, because they give people the confidence that their data is more secure on an Apple product than it is on a Android phone or something else. So that's essentially how federated learning works, and how data science can take an approach of not collecting data, but still providing some, like, as much value as possible to the clients. So thanks very much for listening. If you've any questions, you can contact me, or I think we're taking a few questions now.
Yeah.
Ruth, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Iain. That was a brilliant perspective, especially from the data science perspective too, and business. So we had quite a few comments, quite a bit of conversation going on here. Federated learning sounds like something from a George Orwell novel.
Yeah, when I was putting together the presentation, I was trying to walk the delicate line of basically the practical how trust affects business, without actually going down the rabbit holes of some of the conspiracy theories, and some of which have been shown to be true. But regardless of what people are talking about, or regardless of what companies are doing with people's data, the coverage that it gets certainly hinders a lot of progress. I'm of the opinion that, by and large, most data scientists view their role simply as to provide as much value to the user as possible. In order to do that, we need to use their data, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to use some amoral, unethical approach to doing that. But of course, you always get bad actors, some of which I may have mentioned. So how can we develop technology to sort of restore people's faith and trust in a technology that has ultimately made economies a lot more stable?